Marisa Jacobs is my guest, Managing Director at Xpatweb. Marisa, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate your time. Hello, Marisa.
Hi, good evening, Aubrey. Good evening.
There you go. Good evening to you. Listen, I really appreciate this initiative. I appreciate the fact that you've agreed to talk to us about the various visa options for people who hold the ZEP permit. Amidst all of the controversy, the pain, I suppose, the fears that exist on all sides, I really appreciate that you guys have come up with a way of trying to assist those that may not know what varieties of visas and permits exist for them.
Sure.
What kind of relationship do you as Xpatweb have with the Department of Home Affairs? In other words, I'd like to understand what Xpatweb does generally, but what happened in this particular sense? What was the inspiration and the motivation behind what you're doing now?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Thank you, Aubrey, and thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be able to share some knowledge and to be able to help. I think so. From Xpatweb's perspective, we generally are a work visa service provider. So we usually represent large corporates and multinationals who are bringing talent into the country and who need a work visa for that talent. We've been doing it for many, many years. So as it goes, we have, through doing that, built up a very good relationship with the Department of Home Affairs. We have an annual critical skills survey, which allows us to interact with the department on a regular basis and give input into policy and design policy. We've been very fortunate to be part of the NEPLAC processes where the Immigration Act and the regulation get discussed and how that should be changed. I myself sit on NEPLAC. I represent business for South Africa, where we then discuss that. So we've had a very close relationship with the Department of Home Affairs, and especially over the last few years, where they've really started to invite comment and participation from business, labour and community in terms of how the legislation should be impacted, what the changes are on the ground, what the motivation for those changes are. The department has taken a very evidence-based approach in terms of how legislation gets changed. So we have a very cooperative relationship with the Department of Home Affairs, and we stay very close to them in terms of these changes and how we can assist from a practical point of view in terms of those changes. Like, for example, the thing that really pushed us forward in terms of the ZEP item, which you're asking about, is the announcement by the Minister over this last weekend, where he has said there's been so few ZEP holders who have come forward to make an application in one of the mainstream categories. And he has specifically extending an invitation to say, guys, we're extending the concession by a further 6 months to allow for enough time for you to consult, get advice, and please get your applications in so that we can adjudicate those, so that we can move you off of the ZEP exemption permit and move you onto a mainstream visa category. So there's clearly a gap there where people are not understanding what category to apply for and how to go about it. And we're trying to close that gap for guys so that they can proceed with an application.
That has been my sense, and I'm speaking to the minister in the next hour, and he's agreed to sit with me and talk to me for an hour, and I'm going to be inviting many of our ZEP holders to be part of that conversation, because I think that the conversation has become so toxic, right? And very emotive, and there's fear all round. From the South African side, there's fear and concern. From the ZEP side, there's fear and concern. And I think it has a lot to do with the scarcity that we are feeling at the moment in our economy, which is not just a South African phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon. And, you know, when that kind of thing arises, everybody's afraid and we all run into our lagers. We all go into our lagers, which is very, very sad. But from where you stand, from where you I mean, as somebody who participates at NEDLAC on behalf of business, very close to this conversation administratively, what is the purpose of all of this in your understanding? Why is it that there is a desire to change from the ZEP regime to introduce other more mainstream sort of visa options? What, from your perspective, Marisa, and I'd also be interested to understand what is corporate South Africa's or business South Africa's thinking as far as this is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, that would be a very interesting question to ask the minister. He will be able to tell you exactly what those reasons are. The reasons that we've seen that have been shared in terms of the public is that it's been a very...
Marisa Jacobs, my guest, Managing Director at Xpatweb. I'm not sure what's happening there. We've just lost Marisa. Do you think we should just reconnect with Marisa? I'm not really sure what the reason is for that. I'm asking the question really to try and get to I'm powerfully aware of the emotiveness of this moment. I'm very much aware of it. But I'm also wanting for us to, perhaps for a moment, just to suspend the emotions and try and to understand what are the administrative, the objective forces behind the issue of the ZEP. Yeah. So that whatever opinion we take in the matter, at least there's also the knowledge of some of the objective issues. Because it's easy to simply say, it's South African law. We don't care what you want. Sure. Or, no, we've been here for 20 years. We ought to be. What are the administrative, the objective reasons for something like this, regardless of how we feel? So what I'm asking you to do for now is just engage your brain, just your brain. Marisa Jacobs is back, Managing Director at Xpatweb. So Marisa, again, let me just contextualize my question. I'm really wanting to understand the non-emotive reasons behind that, even though I understand that on either side, the issue, whichever way you cut it, there's going to be emotion, there's going to be anger, there's going to be hurt. But from where you stand, and when you speak to your clients, when you speak to business, what are you hearing about the decision by government to cease the ZEP regime?
Yeah. Thank you, Aubrey, and apologies for that. You did speak about load shedding. That's all I can blame for the signal. So, I mean, we've heard from the department that it's extremely administrative to manage the ZEP process, the ZEP permits. So I think that is one of the reasons that have contributed towards that. From a business perspective, so in the past, a ZEP holder would need to travel all the way back to Zimbabwe to be able to apply for a new visa in a different category. They wouldn't be able to change from a ZEP permit to a mainstream permit within South Africa, which created a barrier for guys. Obviously, the embassy in Zimbabwe is one of the busiest South African embassies around the world. It is one of the embassies that take the longest to process visa applications, just from a practical standpoint, based on the volume that they receive. So it's from a business side, there's been some positive feedback to say our guys who now actually do qualify for a work visa that would allow them to progress to permanent residency in South Africa, they can now apply for that visa in South Africa without the need to return to Zimbabwe to get through the embassy process and wait for their visa to be issued. So there's been some positive feedback around it from a mainstream business, corporate, multinational perspective where the feedback's been positive. I think it's going to be it's definitely a question that you should pose to the minister. He will be able to give you all the real reasons on what they've exactly considered to get to this point. But I do think there's positives and negatives. Yeah.
And I'd like to look at some of those with you, if we can, please, Marisa. But
sure.
The one thing that I find quite glaring and important to say is what you've just said now, that under normal circumstances, people would have to go back to Zimbabwe to go and apply for police clearance and also for a visa. And you're saying that the one thing here is that they don't have to do that. It can be done here in South Africa, which is something that's different. It's not okay. And then talk to me about cost, because that issue has come up quite strongly to say just to apply for a visa in South Africa, the cost is prohibitive. Besides all of the other issues around, accessibility and turnaround times and all of those kinds of things, which I sometimes get a bit bothered by because so few people have applied. But what are some of the critical issues that you're hearing, perhaps from ZEP holders, are seen to be the issues that hold people back from applying?
There is definitely a cost factor to it. I do think a lot of people can't afford it, and there's a cost from Home Affairs to apply for a visa, which I think is extremely low if you compare it to the government cost of other countries to apply for visas. So I don't think the Home Affairs cost is very high. There is a cost by VFS, which is the Visa Facilitation Services, that taking all the applications on behalf of the Department of Home Affairs. The fee for that I do think is quite high. They charge the same fee regardless of whether you are a ZEP holder, a study permit person, a CEO of a big multinational. They've got a flat rate for all applicants, which I do think is something that can definitely be raised.
Explain to me, who are they? What is this? Who are they?
So VFS it's a corporate entity. It's a global entity that is used globally throughout the world. They are like the closest thing that I can explain is like a post office. They're like a post office for the Department of Home Affairs. You lodge your application with them. They take in all the paperwork, make sure all the documents are there, and then they pass it on to the Department of Home Affairs to adjudicate the application. Home Affairs sends it back to the VFS, and the VFS gives it through to the applicant.
Why?
So the ultimate visa.
Why is there a need for this middle person organization?
It was implemented about 4 years ago, and the aim of it was to streamline applications, to streamline the process of accept, so that people were not queuing at the Department of Home Affairs offices to take in those applications. So it was in an attempt to streamline applications, and I do think that they've achieved that to a certain extent through the VFS. It does, however, ramp up the cost. You can't get past that. There's a cost element to it, and for guys like ZEP holders that are cost sensitive, the fact that you have to pay Home Affairs and the VFS, it literally doubles your cost.
So the VFS is a global sort of visa regulating body, and this would be found anywhere in the world?
Not really a regulating body. Like I say, it is just a office that takes in the paperwork and hands it over to Home Affairs, and then Home Affairs hands it back to them. They hand it back to the applicant. So they're not even regulating. They are administrative to take in the application, but they're all around the world. So South Africa uses them in many of the countries where there is large volumes of applications, like in Zimbabwe, but also in China, India, the UK, some other African countries, where you would not go directly to the embassy to submit, like you would in Japan. You would go directly to the embassy, but in the UK you would go to the VFS. They take in the application, they send it through to the embassy, and the same is true for many other countries. If you in South Africa want to apply for a visa to go to the UK, you would also go through to a VFS to submit the application. The same is true for India. They have a different body, not VFS, they're called BLS, I think. So there's different organizations who then facilitate that intake of the visa.
So give me the cost, Marisa. How much does it cost for because you said it's a flat rate, right? How much does it cost for somebody who's wanting to immigrate from ZEP to any of the visas that are available? And we'll talk about that. How much does it cost?
So the normal rate is 1,850 rand. My team will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 1,850, and that is the normal cost to submit at the VFS. You can pay an extra fee so if you were, for example, submitting at the corporate center, it would be more expensive, but that wouldn't be relevant for most of the ZEP holders. And you can submit through the premium lounge, where you then get a specific appointment date and time, and you don't have to queue. And that would then be at an extra 500 rand cost. But actually, I think that's the 1,850. So it's 1,350 for normal applicant, and then 1,850 for premium lounge application.
Does this mean that you have to go through the VFS? You can't go directly to Home Affairs?
You have to. You cannot go directly to Home Affairs. You have to do VFS.
And then added to that is the administrative fee that Home Affairs then charges. How much is that?
Correct. So that is between 425 rand and 1,520 rand, depending on your visa category. There is a sliding scale. So if you were, for example, applying for a study visa, it would be 425 rand. But if you were applying for a work visa, it would be 1,520 rand.
Wow. So in total, an average application for a new visa for a ZEP holder is going to be conservatively above 2,000 rand.
Correct.
011-883-0702 is the number to dial. 021-446-0567. Marisa Jacobs is my guest, Managing Director at Xpatweb. Just disseminating information about what do you do as a ZEP holder to make yourself eligible for any other visa that is available out there for you. Okay, so it's not a cheap process. It's expensive, right? And I imagine that most people who are ZEP holders are going to be cost sensitive for this particular arrangement.
I would imagine so, yes. We've seen that. We've seen that in terms of the inquiries that we receive. There's definitely a cost sensitivity. But there's also a desperateness where there's no way around the cost. They know that there's going to be a cost to it, and a lot of them are going to their employers and asking for assistance to be able to do so.
What from where you sit, Marisa, what is the responsibility, at least of employers, to their ZEP holding employees in this scenario? Is there some responsibility, do you think?
Look, I think that employers in general, my sense has been over the last 12 months as this has unfolded, employers have been extremely supportive of assisting their employees in terms of finding a solution. I don't think there's any problem around employers sort of completely stepping away from it and going, well, this has happened now, I can't employ you anymore. My sense from the market has been that employers are extremely supportive and have been reaching out to ourselves as providers and have been really looking at what kind of solutions can we offer, how can we continue to employ someone who really has contributed to our business, to our family, to whatever it might be in a meaningful way. So I think I don't think there's a problem in terms of the support that employers have been willing to offer. Legally, an employer has a responsibility to ensure that anyone that they employ is legally in the country. So that in a sense of its own creates a legal obligation for any employer to go, if your employee is not going to be on a ZE permit anymore, they need to be on a different permit that allows them to continue to legally work for you. So it does create a responsibility for employers.
Look, and I think it must be said at this point that ZEP holders are not undocumented immigrants. They are actually documented. The ZEP is a government-issued document. So it's very, very important. I think sometimes in the emotions and all of those kinds of things, we forget that the ZEP holder is not an undocumented immigrant. It's somebody who is compliant as far as the law is concerned, and so forth. So it's very, very important for us to say that. The question around responsibility that I'm asking, as far as employers are concerned, is for the paying of the 2,000 rand.
Yep. And I think my experience has been that employers are very willing to pay that 2,000 rand. As they would as a big multinational who is bringing in a technical expert from abroad, or a CEO from abroad, or whatever, the IT specialist. They would always pay for that person's visa application. It is not it's not unusual. In fact, it is the norm for an employer to support the employee in terms of obtaining a legal visa document. It's quite
Should
standard.
that not be part of a mandatory sort of thing that says, look, we shouldn't have the big impediment being cost here? Employers must, even if it's something that the employee pays back over time, but that should be an option that should be, shouldn't that be part of the package here? Because my sense is the 2,000 Rand plus cost to getting another visa is a big part of the non-application and therefore the non-compliance that we're going to see.
Yeah. I think it's an idea to put forward, but I do think it creates an extra barrier. Rather, it's got the negative side of it as well, where an employer goes, well, then if I am obliged to do this, do I then continue to employ you? So it's got two sides to it, which I think must be considered when we think about making something mandatory.
The ZEP permit was always a temporary arrangement, right? I mean, it was always a temporary arrangement in the best of times, if I understand what the Department of Home Affairs says. From where you sit, was there an expectation, a due expectation, an acceptable expectation for it to be turned into something else other than what it is?
I mean, it was issued initially in 2014. It was extended again in 2017. So I do think there was a sort of sense from ZEP holders that it would continue to be extended for an additional period. I do think there was, or that at some point that there would be an opportunity made available to progress from a ZEP permit to a different category of permit, or to permanent residency, or to something more permanent. I do think that expectation existed. Whether that was a realistic expectation, that is a different story. But I do think because the stay was normalized, it is like you highlighted earlier. Those are the immigrants who've legalized their status. They are in the country legally. They are. I think when we start unpacking the 178,000 and start going through submitting applications for each of them, I think you will find that a large majority of them are gainfully employed. It's people who've set up their lives here. They've had children here. They have integrated into society here. Many of them no longer have family back in Zimbabwe. I don't have anywhere to go back to. And I do think that people have set up their lives here, and did have an expectation that they would in some way, shape or form, whether it was by continuous renewal of the ZEP regime or some other form, but they would be able to continue to long-term reside in South Africa.
But to be fair then to the Department of Home Affairs and the government of the Republic of South Africa, isn't this whole new regularization effort precisely to do that? To say, here are a number of visa options for you, given whatever employability category you may belong to, for you to regularize your stay. Isn't that precisely what the South African government is doing? Bearing in mind, Marisa, that it is the government's prerogative as to who and how it allows an immigrant to stay in their country. I mean, isn't that what the Department of Home Affairs is doing?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. They haven't cancelled it and said, guys, we're not renewing it anymore. Everyone please out, go back to Zim. They haven't done that. They've said, guys, we are giving a grace period of 12 months, which has now been extended to 18 months, to say, please, we invite you, please apply for an application in the mainstream category. You can submit that in South Africa. We've made it as easy for you as possible. You don't have to return to Zimbabwe as would normally be the case. And here's the Immigration Act, here's all the categories that are available, and please do apply in one of those categories, and then you are absolutely welcome to stay.
Yeah, because that's been my sense. I mean, I'm aware of the noise, right? I mean, I'm here. I do this show, and I'm aware of the noise, but at no point have I gotten the sense that government is intransigent or insensitive to the realities faced by ZEP holders, except that I do get the sense that the options that are available to ZEP holders may be intimidating, and the noise is also quite intimidating. The prospects of having to go back to a country that you are no longer connected to in many, many ways. I understand all of that, but again, I feel almost defensive for the South African government in that at no point have I gotten the sense that this is a purging exercise. In fact, the extension of a further 6 months again demonstrates to me that there is this extension of the hand to say, please apply. Now, only 6,000 have applied. All right. Let's talk a little bit about what's available, and I think that's where the big problem is. Besides the cost issue, I think that the information that I've been getting from people who are ZEP holders that I've spoken to on air and privately is that the categories and the options that are available are way too limited, and so people are afraid to even try because the options are very limited. What are the options, Marisa?
Okay, good. So let's run through the options. So there's first of all there's family side of things. So are you married to a South African, or are you in a permanent long-term relationship with a South African citizen? Then you can absolutely apply for a visa. It's called a relative visa or accompanying spouse visa, and that is either if you are married or traditionally married, or you are just in a partnership that has lasted for longer than 2 years. All of those would qualify you to be able to apply for a spousal visa or a relative visa to live in the country.
Yeah.
A relative visa can also be if you have a parent or a sibling or a child who is a South African. Not all of those would be relevant for Zimbabwe nationals, but it might be for some. That you can then apply for a relative visa, which allows you to...
How's that possible, to have a child who's South African when you're not?
So you might have been in a relationship with a South African, had a child with a South African, the South African child is born South African, and you've since split up with that partner, but your child is South African.
Right. Okay. So for that, you are qualifying then for a relative visa.
They could qualify for a relative visa, exactly.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
Good. So that is from a family perspective. Then let's move on to study visa. So if you're studying in South Africa at a university, that's part of the National Education Framework, you can apply for a study visa.
Right. Right.
Okay.
And I understand, Marisa, that
Yeah.
these visa options are available to any immigrant at any time. So in other words, this isn't just for ZEP holders. There are millions of immigrants that are in South Africa that would have made use of these various categories. So you don't necessarily, so it's not just something that's exclusively available to ZEP holders. Anybody who wants to regularize themselves according to those categories can do so, yeah?
Absolutely,
All right.
absolutely.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's all the categories in terms of the Immigration Act, regardless of your nationality
Right.
or your current status. These are all available to
Right.
for any foreign national
Yeah.
to apply for to come to South Africa. Good. So let's move on from study visa. Then you've got your work visa category. So there is 3 work visa categories, but only 2 that I believe would be relevant for ZEP holders.
Yeah.
The one is a critical skills visa. So if you've got a skill or an occupation per the critical skills list, the latest one was published in August this year, and there's a large variety of occupations on there, from engineering to IT to healthcare to artisan roles to I mean, there's a large variety on there, and I do believe that there are many ZEP holders that are highly educated and have been employed in South Africa for many
Indeed.
years who would absolutely qualify under the
Indeed.
critical skills category. Good. Then you've got, so if you don't qualify under critical skills, there's a general work visa category where you need to be permanently employed in South Africa, and you can proceed to apply for an application under general work visa. There is business visa. If you run and own a business in South Africa, you can apply for business visa category. It would normally mean that you need to invest funds into that business, but you can apply for a waiver to exempt you from that investment into the business. So you don't, and that is widely available. The DTI, the Department of Trade and Industry, would sign off on that. So you can have a business visa if you are a business owner in South Africa. And I do think that would also be relevant for a number of ZEP holders.
Because one of the things that I've been hearing is that it's not just a visa application process, it's also a waiver process. Just talk to me about what that means, Marisa.
Sure. So a waiver would be if there are any of the requirements in terms of any visa category that you cannot meet. There's a requirement on the list that so let's say, for example, under a critical skills visa, you need to present a letter that a membership of a professional body. But under your occupation, there isn't a professional body that's regulated in terms of your industry.
Right.
You would then apply to Home Affairs to say, can you please waive this requirement of a professional body membership application? And you would motivate why it's not relevant to you. And you can do that for any visa category for any of the requirements.
See, because that has been my question to my brethren from Zimbabwe, because it has been said to me that, look, the options are just not enough. And
yes.
But you're saying to me that there is an option to then say, look, I don't have an option available to me, and therefore I'm waiving these options, but I am motivating for my stay or for a particular visa for these reasons. Is that what you're talking about? Spot
on, exactly that. Exactly
right.
that. And I do believe that that's going to be relevant for a number of ZEP holders. So they must reach out and we will point them in the right direction.
I want to speak to Hillary in Pretoria very quickly. Hillary, hi.
Hi, Ops, how are you?
Thank you very much for calling, Hillary. I'm very well, thanks. Go ahead, sir.
Good. I just wanted to get clarity from your guest.
Yes.
If she can just maybe let us know whether the spousal visa or these relative visas will allow one to work in South Africa, or they are just for the purposes of staying in South Africa.
Very good question. Very, very good question. Marisa, the spousal or family visa, yeah?
So the spousal visa, absolutely. When you submit the spousal visa application, you can request for work authorization on that visa, and then you include your employment contract to show that you've got employment and you want authorization to work. For a relative visa, so that is if you have a parent, a sibling, or child, and your application is on that basis, you cannot get work authorization, unfortunately.
I want you to help me understand the gravitas of the answer to the question I'm going to ask.
Sure.
With all of these visa options that are available, the process that needs to be followed, it remains the prerogative of the South African government to agree or disagree to give a visa, right?
Correct.
And this is not a uniquely South African arrangement. This is international best practice, that whatever visa application I make, and I've had that experience myself,
Yes.
And however much I may believe I am entitled to a particular, it still is the prerogative of that government to issue it or not.
Correct. Absolutely the prerogative of the government, but when they do reject it, they need to give you a reason on why they've rejected it. And you then have the opportunity to appeal that decision if you believe that they've come to that conclusion incorrectly. And if they again reject the appeal, you've got a second option to appeal it again to a higher authority to say, I believe you've come to the wrong conclusion, you've interpreted my documentation wrong. So there are many courses of action, and it cannot just be rejected outright for no reason.
Yes.
There needs to be a reason provided. So if you meet all the requirements and you tick all the boxes, there is no reason why an application will be rejected. At least it's not been my experience, unless it's an administrative oversight, in which case you appeal and it then gets issued and they go, sorry, we didn't see that, or we overlooked that.
Is there,
and it then gets issued.
Is there reason to fear that, though, Marisa? I mean, is there any reason to fear that people are simply going to be rejected without any accompanying reasons as to why, and also the offering of that appeal process? I'm asking this because I'm a bit confused at this stage as to the low numbers of applications besides the prohibitive cost issue. At this stage, based on what I'm hearing from you, there's no reason to fear?
No, absolutely not. I think it is, and I think that's why your show is so valuable and why unpacking it over such a long period so that we can get to these real meaty questions. I think it's so important. I do think there's a fear factor, but I think it's unnecessary. If your visa application gets rejected, it doesn't mean that you cannot appeal it or you cannot submit again in a different category or any of that. So there's no, I fully agree with you to say that there's no reason to fear that.
And that this is international best practice. This is what happens globally.
Absolutely, absolutely. We do visas for the whole Africa continent as well as some international destinations. So I can tell you that comparatively, South Africa has a very comparative immigration system to many of the worldwide visa regimes. We are no different.
Marisa Jacobs, thank you very much for joining us. How do people get in touch with you? Where are you? Have you got offices throughout the country? How do people get in touch with you, Marisa?
I recommend we set up a mailbox that is ZEP@xpatweb.com. So guys can email us. We are manning that box and we will respond to you with good advice on how to proceed. So that's the easiest. But they can visit our website, which is xpatweb.com, to find us there. We've got offices in Johannesburg, in Bryanston. We also have offices down in George. But we practically have offices worldwide with the invention of COVID and Zoom and MS Office. So guys can absolutely reach out to us
Marisa Jacobs, thank you so much for clearing up so much for me. I really, really appreciate it. Much appreciated to Marisa Jacobs. It's Clark, and Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, the Minister of Home Affairs, joins me on the line. Dr. Motsoaledi, thank you so much for joining me once again. I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate you being available to us each time we invite you to come through. Really, really appreciate it, sir.
Yeah, good evening, Aubrey. Good evening to the listeners. Now, thank you very much for having me. It does also help us to explain things
Sure.
when you invite us. So it's mutualism.
Thank you so much. I wish your colleagues in all the other departments felt the same way, Dr. But that's a conversation for another day. I've just had a practitioner in the space of helping people apply for visas, Marisa Jacobs, Managing Director of Xpatweb. And I asked questions similar to the ones I'm going to be asking you this evening around the issue of the ZEP issue. First of all, perhaps let me start off and ask, why did you extend the ZEP period by another 6 months? Why?
Aubrey, to do this work very thoroughly, you may remember, if I take you back, there was a team which I did after Bushiri left South Africa, running illegally. But after we have learned that he acquired his permanent residence irregularly or illegally, I then put up a team which was led by Dr. Lubisi. It met some forensic experts, forensic analysts, etc. You are aware that they produced a very beautiful report showing all the shenanigans that are happening in that field. So they have the information on their fingertips. They understand the whole issue of how people apply, how do they get it, who gets it wrong, how do they destroy, how do they cheat the system, etc. So I then said, because of that, let me elect the same team because their work has been completed, so that they come and scrutinize this ZEP period. They scrutinize them. Scrutinizing two things: those who apply for visas and those who apply for waivers. And then advise me and the DG, because in the final analysis, it's us who must sign. So that team was together with an internal team of legal experts. Now they've been having lots of meetings. The last of which was on the most recent of which was on the 1st of September, that last week, 1st of September. And it was a whole day meeting where they looked at the whole situation, the number of people who have applied, the amount of work that needs to be done, etc., etc. Then they wrote me a letter the same day. They advised me to give an extension of 6 months. Since they are the ones who are going to be doing this work, I really did not have any reason why I must argue against them, because they studied the situation more than me. They understand exactly what is expected and what's to be done. So it will be good for me to listen to them, because they are the guys who are going to do the real work. And that's why I give that extension of 6 months as per the recommendation.
Did the whole slew of threats to you by various NGOs and organizations for court action not play a part in the decision to change the extension period?
No, not at all. After all, those court cases are still going ahead, by the way. They are sitting next month. They haven't changed this issue of extension. They are still going ahead, and we are still defending, preparing. Just today, my DG was sending an affidavit to send them so many groups, and there's exchange of affidavits and all that. So no, not at all. We are defending every inch of our decision. This one was a particular advice from the people who are going to do the work.
What did they say? I mean, did they say? What I'm trying to understand is the rationale behind the extension. Did they say that they would be? Yeah.
They simply say the amount of work that is awaiting them. Seeing especially that out of the 178,000 people, only 4,000 applied for visas and 9,000 applied for waivers. When they start coming in and looking at how did they deal with them, how many hours or how many days it needs for each, their calculation brought them to the belief that no, we need 6 months. That within the remaining 3 months, it won't happen. Remember, we're living with 3 months.
Yes. What makes them think is going to change? If there has been an extension for 12 months, what makes them believe that an extra 6 months is going to change things?
Well, it will give them time in case people want to come in. They are not saying people will change and come in. They're just saying if it has to happen, we mustn't be caught off guard. Let us not be the ones who are found wanting. If it's the people who are found wanting by not applying, it be them, but not us.
Minister, I'm having difficulty hearing you, so we might have to do something about the sound quality. But let's continue and see.
Can I change it? Is it better?
Yeah, it is much better. It is much better now. Okay, I want to go back, and the question the reason why I want to go back to the inception of the ZEP is because my follow-up question is fundamentally going to be, is that perhaps not why there is application apathy from ZEP holders? Take me back to when this regime started, and perhaps why.
Yeah. Aubrey, the regime started in 2009, and this is the history of it. The refugee laws of the country, the law under which people come and visit South Africa, was taken directly from the United Nations Convention, which was developed in 1951. You may realize that after the Second World War, people were scattered all over the world because they were running, because there was war. And the United Nations wanted that to be regularized, that it must not be a random thing done by one individual. It must be something that is controlled by international law.
Yeah.
Then they passed that convention, which countries have to ratify through their parliaments. You may remember that South Africa was not yet regarded as a democracy, so we only ratified after democracy in 1996. Now, that convention is very clear. It stipulates very clearly under what conditions may you be allowed in a country without any documents whatsoever, but be accepted there. Firstly, it talks about natural disasters. If there's a natural disaster, you are allowed to run next door without any document, and then they'll document you there, they'll register you and all that. Secondly, if there is war, like now is happening in Ukraine. And then thirdly, if you are being persecuted, you as an individual or you and your family, under 4 things: political persecution, cultural persecution, religious beliefs and practices, or sexual orientation, then you come in. Now, when South Africa domesticated, after 1996, when they domesticated it into an act, which happened in 1998, if you look at the atmosphere and the terrain around the continent and the rest of the world, democracy was setting in. On the African continent, countries that used to be ruled by dictators changed to democracy. Countries that never knew elections or were not even allowing multi-party but only one party, they started changing. Countries where a ruler could rule forever, they start putting terms.
Yep.
So all those things were showing winds of change. And with that background, South Africa passed this Refugee Act. And now the system to welcome people who are running away from their country was designed at that time, which means it was not designed for a huge number of people, because nobody was anticipating that there will be a huge number of people who ran away from their countries. That's why in 1998, only 16,000 people came to South Africa asking for this refugee, asylum seeker refugee status. Only 16,000.
Yes.
The figure kept on fluctuating until in 2006, it was 53,000 people. Now the system was designed to manage them, and it managed them. It processed them. Those who were rejected were rejected. Those who were allowed in were allowed in. But all of a sudden, there was this world economic collapse, if you remember, in 2008.
Yes.
We went into a recession, even us. But for some reason, people thought South Africa is still better off. If you want to escape that recession, you run to South Africa. But at the same time, Zimbabwe's economy collapsed completely, if you remember.
Yes.
Then lots of people came here. In 2008, more than 200,000 people arrived. Remember, a system is designed to accept 16,000, 30,000, up to 53,000 maybe. It was for the first time that they had such a huge number. That system was run down, and the following year, while it was in shock, another more than 200 come in. Within 4 years, they are having 450,000 people who are all applying, and many of them using the United Nations Convention, and they were not qualifying. So people started defrauding South African documents. They started bribing and defrauding through. Of course, they were arrested, but when they were taken to court, the court would just say, let him pay 1,500 fine and release them. So Home Affairs realized that they are going nowhere. That's when then Home Affairs said, okay, let us give a special dispensation here to deal with just this group of people. We give them a special dispensation. And that special dispensation was given to people from 3 countries: Zimbabwe, who got the largest number, then Basotho, and Angola, who got only 1,600 of such a special dispensation, or special exemptions, or special permits, whichever you want to call them. So that's how it happened. But it had conditions. It was never meant to be permanent in the first place.
So Minister,
it was thought that it's taking us through a particular period that is very difficult. But yes, and so that's why it was given for 5 years.
And then subsequently, how many times was it then extended?
It was given for 5 years up to 2014. But in 2014, they realized that no, the situation seems like it hasn't changed. The refugee reception system is still as it was, and all that. And so they gave an extension, and during that time, a process to amend some of the legislation in the refugee reception started, and they started amending the laws and changing, because some of the laws were actually impeding the process. So they extended it to 2017, just for 3 years. Right? So in 2017, then they said it will expire after 5 years, which is the 31st of December 2021. Now, in January 2021, we started sitting and having meetings. But when this thing expires in 12 months' time, what do we do? Keep on renewing. For how long do you live with this temporary thing, which you started as a temporary thing, is now becoming permanent? And by the way, Aubrey, it was actually bordering to a situation where it may become unconstitutional, and I'll tell you why. Because it was given under certain conditions. The conditions were that you are not allowed to apply for any other permit that exists under immigration law. Remember, there are 17 types of permits under South Africa's immigration law. You are not allowed to apply for any of those. Just to give you an example, marriage. When you marry a South African, I'm talking about a real marriage, not a bogus marriage. When you get married to a South African, you have got a right to apply for permanent residence and eventually for naturalization in South Africa. But that condition says no, you are not allowed to apply for any other thing. When you have got a scarce skill and you do studies that qualifies you for a scarce skill, it means you can't apply for it because you have already got an exemption permit, which was a special permit saying you are not entitled to apply for any other thing. So we realized this thing is going to catch up with us somewhere, but also you can't just keep on being temporary forever. That's why we decided come December, we'll give a grace period of 12 months. all people must be given a chance to apply for any of the other 17 permits that exist under the immigration law.
Let me jump in right there. So,
yeah.
So under the ZEP, the understanding was you may not apply for any other a visa, but what you've supplied now is the ability to do so. They who are holders of the ZEP permit may now apply for any other visa that they qualify for, if I understand you correctly.
Yes, that's exactly the chance you are giving them. That now you are open, you are advised to apply for any other, because this one which you are holding is no longer going to apply.
Right. So one, Minister, the ZEP regime has been extended at least 3 times since its existence, if I understand you correctly.
In a way, you may say it was extended, but technically, in the books of Home Affairs, it was not an extension, because they were giving a new one with a new name every time. In other words, the first one was called ZP something.
I remember that. In our initial conversation in the past, you've already explained that. But
but then in 2017,
yes,
it was called ZEP, Zimbabwe Exemption Permit.
Yes. So what I'm trying to establish here is the reason why we have application apathy. Could it be true, just from where you sit, that perhaps holders of the ZEP have become accustomed to the idea that, they'll extend it again. And you came up last year to announce that this regime ends on the 31st of December, 2021, and then extended it again for 12 months. And then once again, you are extending it for another 6 months. Is it possible, regardless of the official name, is it possible, regardless of the official name in the books of the Department of Home Affairs, that the experience and therefore the training is that, the South African government talks a good deal, but they don't really follow up. And that's why, especially with all of these court cases that they are going to have to be facing, this thing is just going to frizzle up and die somewhere. And that's why people are feeling that they don't have to be urgently applying. And what you've done by giving them another 6 months is you've signaled that experience to be true, that they'll just extend it again and again, especially now that there are all sorts of court cases. That's what some people are asking. Talk to me about that.
Well, look, I can only hazard a guess or take from what we pick up here and there. I can't answer for them. But in some of the court papers, they are saying, no, we actually want permanent resident status. We've been here for too long enough. There's no chance to apply for any other thing. We must just be made permanent residents. At least that's what one of the court cases say. Others are saying, look, we don't have any other home. It does not exist anymore. We've been in South Africa and we know no other home than South Africa. So South Africa is obliged to give us permanent residence and obviously eventually naturalization. So there's no need to apply for any other thing. That must happen automatically or something like that.
Yeah.
The one you are saying may also be true, that they felt like, look, in the past, whatever name you bring it under, it has been extended. And, of course, the issue of court cases, that some might have been told that, look, we are going to court, this thing is going to be squashed by a court of law, so don't even bother. So all those are possibilities. I cannot hazard any other. There are possibilities because the first ones, I saw them in the court papers, and the other is just what I'm thinking, that people have been told, all right, this thing is not going to go anywhere. Especially rich employers who are making use of some of these people as cheap labor, very cheap labor.
Dr. Motsoaledi, is it therefore not a legal defense to say that the Republic of South Africa has given these signals that have made people crystallize and concretize the idea that the extensions will be coming. History is the greatest evidence that they've done it at least 3 times, now the 4th time, in fact the 5th time now. Is it not a legal, constitutional argument to make, to say, but it's reasonable then for people to expect to be naturalized, to be given permanent under those circumstances? Because you've flirted it, Dr. Motsoaledi.
Well, I don't know such a law, that if you sign a contract with somebody and make it clear that this thing is for 5 years, then they'll say, no, you are making me expect. I've also had that argument that there's legitimate expectation. And I'm sure you are aware that in labor law, there is something called legitimate expectation, but its role is adjudicated upon by the courts of law. I've never had it in this type of situation where you give somebody a document and say, I'm allowing you to be here, and after 5 years, this thing will come to an end, and say, because in the past it was changed to something else, then it means it's going to. I'm changing it to something else, which is what? Which is regular, what do you call it? Regular visas.
Yep.
17 of them. That's what I'm changing it to. So if the expectation was that I will call another different name, I don't know. I'm not sure. That will be decided upon by the legal system. Yeah, Aubrey.
Yeah, I suppose that's what we need to wait for, and that's the question, I suppose, that is on a lot of people's minds. I'm also asking the question around the expectation, which I find quite interesting, that South Africa as a government must make certain concessions. Is that best practice? Is that international best practice, that governments of various countries are expected to make certain concessions to people that are in their country? And I suppose what I'm asking here is for you to explain that waiver aspect of the extension to this regime. I understand the application for visas, but what is this waiver story? What is that all about?
Oh, it is in the Act, Aubrey. It is in the Act that there are certain situations or conditions that may compel a person not to follow directly what is in the Act, and the minister is given a power to waiver that. Let me give you an example, a very simple example. Under the Immigration Act, if you overstay in the country for whatever number of days, there are people who overstay 2, 3, 5 years and all that. But if you overstay, the moment you decide to cross the border and they found that you have overstayed, you are declared an undesirable person for a period of a year up to 5 years. They declare you that and they put a stamp in your passport. You can apply for a minister for a waiver and give reasons. If the reasons are good and reasonable, the minister can give you that waiver. In other words, it's a waiver to follow normal mechanics under certain conditions and under certain circumstances.
Ngobani Chuma says the Minister of Home Affairs speaks as though ZEP holders gave a mandate to any of the people representing them in courts. Have the ZEP holders spoken? Has DHA given a response to anyone who applied for a waiver? That's a question from Ngobani Chuma. Have you established, and I don't know whether that is something that should be your responsibility as Home Affairs, so I'm interested to hear a little bit more from Ngobani as to the rationale of that question. But have you been able to establish, Dr. Motsoaledi, as to whether or not those representing, that say they represent ZEP holders, like the NGOs and various other organizations, whether they've actually been given as a mandate by ZEP holders?
Well, they must establish that themselves. Because what we did, yes, they must, when you represent a client in court, you must show the money, obviously. So that one must be determined by the courts, or our lawyers will deal with that. But what we did on our side, we have got the files of 178,000 people. We went into the files and say, let's discuss directly with them. We did not assume that somebody is representing them. So we said we discussed directly with them and wrote them letters. If you remember, emails, SMSs. We also put the same letter on our website. We also sent it to the Zimbabwean embassy. We also bought advertorial in newspapers and put that in order to communicate with them directly, because none of them has ever informed us that so and so is representing me.
Dr. Motsoaledi, I get a sense that there are a lot of people who are saying the 6 months edition is a capitulation of sorts. And
I've also heard that.
Yeah. And therefore, I want to hear it from you as to the spirit of the extension. So some are arguing that Motsoaledi and his team have just capitulated because they're afraid of the legal actions and so forth. I want to understand from you, what is the spirit by which this extension has been granted? Is it because, what is the spirit? I understand what you've said to us, but is it really because you want to help those ZEP holders? Are they still welcome in South Africa? What is the spirit of this extension?
Aubrey, I've already explained that. I've put a team of experts who know really what to do. We were honest when we say we are giving people a chance to apply for other visas. We were serious. We were not bluffing. And so if they have to apply it, they must be processed individually, not even as a group, individually. Each of the 178,000 applications must be scrutinized individually. If they apply for a waiver to see if it's reasonable and understandable, if they apply for a visa to see if they do qualify. That's what we're doing, and we are true and honest to our word. Now, if the people are going to be doing that work, say, look, we think we're asking for 6 months more, otherwise it won't be possible for us to deliver what we want. Surely, you ought to listen, because if you don't, if something goes wrong, they'll say, no, but we have told you, Minister. And the very same people who are capitulating will say, yeah, this minister is hardcore, but he doesn't listen. Experts advise him, and he just insisted, look what has happened there now. So it's a sort of, it depends where you are sitting as an individual. If you are not involved in this thing, it's easy to say capitulation. But I'm putting it loud and clear. We're not capitulating. The court cases are still on. We are still going to defend them because we believe in what we are doing, Aubrey.
So I want to stay a little bit on the issue of the waiver, because I'm getting a lot of people. Bridget, for example, says she's a teacher, right? And that the options and the qualifications you require in the various options that are available, she just doesn't comply. Would she be in a position to write a letter, for example, to the minister and say, Minister, these are the qualifications, but I don't comply, but these are the issues for which I am asking you to waive that. Is that a realistic expectation? Because I'm fundamentally asking, why is it that ZEP holders are not applying? Why is there such an apathy? 6,000 out of 178,000 people have applied thus far. It's unacceptable. My question, though, is how much are you going to listen to the requests for waivers? And again, I suppose I'm still asking that question around the spirit of this thing, because there's a lot of people who say, it's a fait accompli, they don't want us here, that's why we don't want to apply. But talk to me about that.
Well, Aubrey, they can make whatever statements in terms of their belief. I said it very clear that we are giving them a chance to regularize their stay. After all, Aubrey, there are lots of people here from all over the African continent, from the East, from Europe, who are here via the Immigration Act. They are there. So I don't see why Zimbabweans believe they should be different from any other person and be under a special dispensation for life. I really don't understand that, because there are other people who are here. But on top of that, I'm sure you are aware that there are millions of Zimbabweans in South Africa. Millions, not thousands. Right? And the people who are on ZEP are only 178,000. So there are millions who are here. Some are studying, others are on skate skill. Some are working in some of the very important institutions in our country. And just to give you an example, Aubrey, from January to December 2021, out of all the scarce skill visas that we issued to the whole world, 38% went to Zimbabweans. 38%. That they've got scarce skills, they can come in. 38% of the whole world, not being compared with the African continent or the whole world. Then comes study visa. Of all the students from all over the world that applied to study in South Africa, those who were given study visas, 25%, they went to Zimbabweans. Then comes general work visa. General work, which doesn't need any particular skill, just general work. 15% went to Zimbabweans. Then came relative visas, coming here to stay here because your relative is here. That's called the relative visa. It's one of the 17 visas. 14% went to Zimbabweans. So that we've been doing away from the ZEP. And I don't understand why in this case, when we are asking for that, all of a sudden, there are lots of stories, really.
Tell me, I hear you, Mr. Minister. So let me ask about the issue of the cost. I mean, that's coming up also quite heavily, because I suppose the waiver issue. The
cost of what?
The cost of applying through VFS, and then, of course, the visa from the Department of Home Affairs. That has been discussed by many people to say that's part of the reason why people are not waiving. It's just too expensive. How do you respond?
How? Aubrey, can you give me one single country in the world where there are no costs when you apply for visas or for permits? In fact, if you compare the South African passport to the Zimbabwean passport, people who get Zimbabwean passport pay much, much more than what people are staying in South Africa. In fact, we've discovered that we are even much cheaper than many parts of the world. So the issue of expense, we cannot run away from it. Even here in South Africa, I'm sure, when people go to Home Affairs, there are certain expenses which they incur. It's just the way it is.
All right, so I just want to stay with you, Minister, because in my mind, a number of things are very important for us to really get under the belt. One, if people feel as though the options that are available are not enough, or they perhaps don't comply, there is an option to write a letter in that application to the minister for a waiver. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Two.
Yes, but it's not automatic.
No, for sure.
That's why I needed experts to advise me.
Sure.
Because it must be reasonable.
Sure. Second thing, you're saying to me that the matter of costs is one that cannot be entertained by your department, because that is a reality internationally. All countries have costs in the application of visas, and therefore,
absolutely.
Right. 3, you're saying to me that unless people actually apply, and at this stage we've only got 6,000 applications. In fact, I think you broke it down to 4,000 applications for the visas and something like 2,000, 3,000 for the waivers. But unless people apply, they cannot expect then to use arguments that are not based on the reality of what returns from that application. But some are asking, how many waivers have been accepted? Or how many waivers has the minister entertained? Is that a reasonable question?
Yeah, it's reasonable, but I can't answer it because nothing has arrived at my table yet. It was still this team that were dealing with these issues. That's why I told you on Friday, they met for the whole day. As to what they they recommended and what they didn't has not yet landed on my table. So I won't be able to answer that question.
Minister, a question that's coming from Char on Twitter, and it's one that is close to my heart. The 30th of December comes, children are at school, even those of ZEP holders, and their parents don't comply for whatever reason. What happens to those children who will be in mid an academic year? What happens to them?
Aubrey, I've answered this quite a number of times because it has been thrown, at us many times about not caring about lives of children, etc. We said when we stop the Zimbabwe exemption permit, we are not at the same time suspending all the other laws of the Republic. We're not. There's no way we can. And one of them is the Children's Act. The Children's Act is very clear on how you deal with a child, whether a South African or a non-South African. And the courts, right up to the Constitutional Court, have ruled in that whatever decision you take, it must always be in the best interest of the child. That's why, Aubrey, there are parents who find themselves here simply because I know this abuse. There are people who just impregnate a local woman so that when the law must apply to them, and they know that the best interest of the child will be taken into consideration. Unfortunately, that's the reality of our situation. I cannot run away from it. It's in the Children's Act, and there's no way that we can sidestep it.
Again, I want to recap for my own thinking because I've got then final questions. The ZEP or the discontinuation of the ZEP regime is to help those that have ZEP permits, which is a temporary permit, to find other visa regimes that can allow them to stay in a less temporary way in South Africa. Am I correct in understanding it that way?
Yes, you're correct.
Secondly,
you are correct,
yep.
But you must also add,
yes,
if they qualify for those particular
right. That was my second question. My second question is the issue of prerogative, because I get the sense that there is an understanding, at least for South Africa and South Africa alone, which is quite strange, that if I apply, I am obliged to get an affirmative answer from the Department of Home Affairs. Talk to me about how that works. Now, my experience is that the prerogative remains that of the government, and appealing processes are available if you don't agree with the decision of any government in the world. Talk to me about South Africa and that process, the process of agreeing to give somebody a visa or not, and whose prerogative it is, and how that is managed, Minister.
Yeah. It's prerogative of countries, whether they allow you into their country or not. All over the world, that is the case. As to why people believe it must be different in South Africa, I don't know whether it's the issue of undermining the country or that the country has given a wrong impression of itself. But what I've heard is that people believe the Constitution in South Africa allows for everything. That is not allowed anyway. At least I heard one of the asylum seekers saying that, who is hating one of the diaspora fora, saying something like that when they asked him why he left so many countries, because he came from the East to come to South Africa. He said, no, here the laws and the Constitution are very agreeable to whatever you want. Perhaps that might be the driving factor, and that might be the belief. But it's not exactly like that. But I also hear South Africans sometimes, even prominent ones, who are against the issue of immigrants, blaming Home Affairs and saying, no, people are illegal because Home Affairs does not want to, or is failing to document them. Meaning, actually, if you read that statement, it says anybody who comes and look for a document must just get it. Do you understand what I mean?
Well, that's the question I asked at the opening of this hour after my conversation with Marisa Jacobs. It appears to me that the expectation, and generally it sounds like it's an expectation only for South Africa, that if I apply, you must give me my visa, or you must extend my and that I find very strange as somebody who's traveled quite extensively throughout the world. That expectation is expected of nobody else but South Africa. Now I must ask you this question, Minister.
What was the answer? I was not listening.
No.
No. What was the answer?
The answer was that no. The prerogative remains that of that particular country, that particular government. Yes, if you don't agree with the decision, that you can appeal, but that prerogative remains in the purview of that government, which is what I thought the reality is all over the world.
I think so, Aubrey, and I don't think if you sit now and check all over the world, you will find any one country in the whole world where so many people from other countries are suing the state which is hosting them in the manner that's happening in South Africa. I don't think you'll find, I don't know. I'm speaking.
But that's the question I wanted to ask you, Dr. Motsoaledi, as we close. And I think I've asked it before, and it boggles my mind. Why is it that South Africa is subjected to that kind of... Why is this that kind of entitlement when it comes to South Africa? I don't understand it.
Well, I don't understand it either, Aubrey. I don't understand it, to tell you the truth. I'm just hazarding a guess from what we pick up that perhaps there is a belief that, like you ask about costs. You ask about cost. There is a belief that everything in South Africa, you ought to get it free for our information. Recently, there was a debate, a raging debate about issues of healthcare, if you understand what I mean. Now, South Africans are divided about it. Now, in 2013, when I was a Minister of Health, I visited a clinic in Hammanskraal, which was funded from PEPFAR, from the American government. President Bill Clinton was visiting that clinic, right? So I went that morning to prepare for him in order to welcome him. And I was sitting with a sister. As we were talking there, because I'm a Minister of Health, she told me, said, Minister, are you going to do something about it? I said, what? She said, Minister, 60% of the women who I see here coming for antenatal care are from Zimbabwe. I said, but how do you know, sister? She said, no, we're women. We talk. I'm their nurse. I talk with them and I ask them. And I said, what are they saying? She said, no, they say in Zimbabwe, when you are pregnant, you pay a deposit of equivalent of 500 rand. That was in 2018. They say you pay 500 rand. The day you go to hospital to deliver, you must bring your own things. You must bring your own blankets, your own utensils, sometimes even your own medicine. That's what they told the sister. So she said, word spread around there that in South Africa everything is free. So if I've got 500 rand, why don't I jump into a bus or a kumbo or whatever, go to South Africa, arrive there and register, then everything I get is free. So perhaps that type of belief and understanding is what is at play here. Yeah. But I'm just hazarding a guess.
Peter Chesire on Twitter says, the minister is saying that ZEP holders can apply for other visas or waivers. When was the last time his office issued waivers, long-term visas or PR applications? He is disingenuous. None of this happened for the last 1 year, if not longer. And then he says Home Affairs is dysfunctional. How do you respond, Minister?
That's nonsense, actually. Absolute rubbish, because we can give a list. The only time where we stopped, Aubrey, was during COVID. If he says more than a year, COVID was here for 2 years. And we are not the only ones who never stopped issuing visas. The whole world was at the standstill, if you remember. So how do you give a visa to a person and say, come to my country, and at the same time the borders are closed? So
what is your advice? What is your advice to ZEP holders who are listening to this conversation at the moment?
I'll advise them to apply, because In the document I issued last week, I wrote very clearly, that we are not going to entertain any other extension. And I'm repeating, Aubrey, anybody who said we never issued visas and all that is talking rubbish. I've just given you the statistics for last year. And during COVID, you can't blame me and say during COVID you are not issuing any visas. Nobody was in the whole world.
Yeah.
So
Dr. Motsoaledi,
maybe
we've run out of time, and once again, I've got to thank you for being available each time we have these conversations. Perhaps one of these days we do need to have a conversation around what's happening at the hospitals, the MEC's remarks a few weeks ago, because I think they tie into all of this. There's questions that I still have around how the Border Management Authority is doing at the moment. It's just a few weeks or a few months since it's been in place. I do want to find out how it's doing. There are those that are suggesting that there's already bribes being taken and so forth, but I do want to have that conversation with you with regards to all of those issues. But thank you very much for joining us with regards to the issue of the ZEP regime. Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, Minister of Home Affairs, much appreciated.